The question exploded from Felix's lips before he could stop it. Rain hammered against the studio windows, turning the city outside into a blur of silver lights and shadows. The practice room, usually filled with music and laughter, suddenly felt too small. Hyunjin looked up from his phone. What? The room fell silent. Even the air seemed to freeze. Felix stood near the doorway, his chest rising and falling faster than normal. Water dripped from the ends of his hair, darkening the collar of his hoodie. He had run all the way back after seeing something he couldn't erase from his mind. Hyunjin sitting in a cafe, smiling, across from someone Felix had never seen before, someone who looked at Hyunjin as if he were the only person in the world. "That guy," Felix said, his voice sounded sharper than intended. "The one you were with." Understanding flickered across Hyunjin's face. Oh, tension in Felix's shoulders tightened. "He has a name, Felix." For some reason, those words hurt, more than they should have. More than they had any right to. Hyunjin locked his phone and slipped it into his pocket. "His name is Jiho." Name settled heavily in the room. Jiho, a stranger, a person Felix knew nothing about, yet somehow he already hated hearing his name, not because Jiho had done anything wrong, but because Hyunjin smiled differently when talking about him. Felix noticed it immediately. The slight curve of Hyunjin's lips, the warmth in his eyes, the softness in his voice. Details nobody else would notice. Details Felix had spent years memorizing. A dangerous silence stretched between them, then Hyunjin sighed. "Why are you acting like this?" The question struck harder than expected. Because Felix didn't know how to answer. How could he explain something he barely understood himself? The truth sat buried beneath years of friendship, years of fear, years of pretending, because admitting the truth meant risking everything. And Felix wasn't ready for that, not yet. "I'm not acting weird." Hyunjin raised an eyebrow. "You literally ran back here just to ask about him." Felix looked away. The smell of rain lingered in the room. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Inside, something far more dangerous was beginning to form. Hyunjin had always been the center of every room he entered. People naturally gravitated toward him, his confidence, his creativity, his kindness hidden beneath sharp edges. Felix knew all of it. He knew how Hyunjin stayed awake at 3 in the morning sketching when he couldn't sleep, how he chewed the inside of his cheek when nervous, how he secretly hated being alone despite pretending otherwise. Felix knew him better than anyone, or at least he thought he did. Now he wasn't so sure, because there was suddenly a part of Hyunjin's life that didn't include him, and the realization terrified him. The following days only made things worse. Jiho appeared everywhere, messages, phone calls, coffee invitations, casual mentions during conversations. Every time Hyunjin said his name, Felix felt something twist painfully inside his chest. It was irrational, immature, embarrassing, and impossible to stop. One evening the group gathered for dinner after practice. The restaurant glowed warmly against the cold night. Steam rose from bowls of food, conversations overlapped. Laughter filled the air, everything should have felt normal. Then Jiho arrived. The moment he stepped through the door, Felix's appetite disappeared. Jiho was taller than expected, confident, handsome, the kind of person who made an impression immediately. And judging by Hyunjin's smile he already had. "Everyone, this is Jiho." Introductions followed, polite greetings, friendly smiles. Felix forced himself to participate. Jiho seemed genuinely nice. That somehow made everything worse. If Jiho had been arrogant, Felix could have hated him. If Jiho had been rude, Felix could have justified his jealousy. But Jiho wasn't either of those things. He was kind, funny, respectful, the exact type of person Hyunjin would like. As the evening continued, Felix found himself watching them. The way Jiho listened carefully whenever Hyunjin spoke. The way Hyunjin laughed more freely around him. The way their shoulders occasionally brushed. Each small moment felt insignificant. Together, they became unbearable. At one point, Jiho handed Hyunjin his jacket when the restaurant's air conditioning became too cold. A simple gesture, nothing more. Yet Felix's grip tightened around his glass. A sharp crack echoed. Everyone turned. Water spilled across the table. Felix stared at the shattered glass in his hand. A thin line of blood appeared across his palm. Silence followed. Concern instantly crossed Hyunjin's face. "Felix." He stood immediately, without hesitation, without thinking, without caring about anyone else in the room. And for a brief moment, Felix forgot about Jiho entirely. Because Hyunjin was holding his hand, looking at him, worried about him. Just him, bleeding. It's nothing. Doesn't look like nothing. Warmth of Hyunjin's fingers felt dangerous, comforting, painful, necessary, everything at once. For a second, Felix wanted time to stop, to stay suspended in this moment forever. But reality returned quickly. Jiho was still there, watching, understanding something nobody else seemed to notice. Something Felix desperately wanted to hide. That night, after everyone left, Felix walked home alone. The city streets shimmered beneath recent rainfall. Neon signs reflected across puddles. Cars passed like distant ghosts. His injured hand throbbed beneath the bandage, yet the ache in his chest hurt more, because he finally understood what scared him. It wasn't losing Hyunjin's attention. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't even Jiho. It was the possibility that Hyunjin might someday belong to someone else, and Felix wasn't sure he could survive watching that happen. When he reached his apartment, exhaustion settled over him. He dropped onto the couch and closed his eyes. The room was dark, silent, lonely. His phone vibrated. A message appeared from Hyunjin. "Did you clean the wound properly?" Felix stared at the screen. His heart responded before his mind could. A small smile appeared despite everything. Yes. A few seconds later, another message arrived. "Good. Get some rest." Simple words, ordinary words. Yet Felix read them again and again. Outside his window, rain began falling once more. Soft at first, then heavier. Like the sky was carrying emotions it could no longer contain. Felix leaned back against the couch and listened to the storm. Somewhere across the city, Hyunjin was probably asleep, completely unaware that every smile he gave someone else felt like a wound Felix couldn't explain, completely unaware that a quiet friendship had already become something far more dangerous. The rain continued through the night, tapping against the apartment windows like restless fingers. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same image, Hyunjin smiling, Jiho beside him. The memory replayed endlessly. By morning, exhaustion sat heavily beneath Felix's eyes. The city was still damp from the storm when he arrived at the studio. The familiar hallway smelled faintly of coffee and freshly cleaned floors. Usually, this place felt like a second home. Today, it felt different, uncomfortable, like something had shifted while nobody was paying attention. Felix pushed open the practice room door. Music echoed softly from the speakers. A few members had already arrived, and Hyunjin was there. Of course he was. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, sketchbook balanced on his knees. For a moment, Felix simply watched him. The way sunlight filtered through the window and illuminated his hair. The way his brow furrowed slightly while drawing, the small habit of tapping his pencil whenever he concentrated. Details Felix had loved for years without realizing it. Then Hyunjin looked up, their eyes met. A smile immediately appeared on Hyunjin's face. Morning. The word was simple, yet Felix felt his heartbeat stumble. Morning. Hyunjin studied him for a second. "You look terrible." Felix laughed weakly. "Thanks. I mean it." Hyunjin closed his sketchbook. "Did you sleep at all?" "Not really," but Felix shrugged. "I'm fine." Hyunjin gave him a look that clearly said he didn't believe him. The problem was that Hyunjin always noticed. He noticed when Felix was tired, when he was stressed, when something was bothering him. Sometimes Felix wondered if Hyunjin could see straight through him. If he could, everything would already be over. Because the truth was becoming harder to hide, practice lasted for hours. The routine was demanding, sweat soaked through their clothes, their muscles burned. Yet Felix welcomed the physical exhaustion. It gave him something else to focus on, something other than Hyunjin, something other than Jiho. For a while it worked. Until lunchtime, everyone gathered around a table filled with takeout containers. Conversations flowed naturally. Then Hyunjin's phone buzzed. The smile appeared instantly. That smile. The one Felix had started noticing far too often. Someone asked. Hyunjin nodded. "He sent me a picture." Felix looked down at his food. Suddenly he wasn't hungry anymore. "What picture?" another member asked. Hyunjin laughed. He tried making pasta. Table erupted with amusement. Apparently the result had been disastrous. Even Felix couldn't stop himself from smiling slightly. But the warmth disappeared quickly, because Hyunjin looked happy, genuinely happy. And Felix hated that his first reaction wasn't joy. It was fear. Fear that someone else was becoming important. Fear that someone else was finding a place beside Hyunjin. A place Felix had always assumed would belong to him. The realization filled him with guilt. Because Hyunjin deserved happiness. He deserved friendships, connections, people who cared about him. So why did Felix feel threatened by every new person who entered his life? The answer arrived before he could stop it. Because he wasn't afraid of losing a friend. He was afraid of losing the person he loved. That evening after practice ended, Hyunjin approached him. "Want to walk home together?" Felix blinked. The question caught him off guard. "Sure." City glowed beneath the setting sun, orange light reflected from glass buildings. The air felt cool after the recent rain. For several minutes they walked in silence, comfortable silence, the kind only years of friendship could create. Then Hyunjin spoke. "Been strange lately." His stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean." His voice remained gentle, not accusing, just concerned. Felix stared ahead. People passed them on the sidewalk. Cars moved through intersections. Life continued around them. Meanwhile, his world felt frozen. "Did I do something wrong?" The question made Felix stop walking. Hyunjin stopped too. Concern immediately appeared in his eyes. The sight made Felix's chest ache. Because Hyunjin always blamed himself first, even when he shouldn't. "No," answer came quickly. "You didn't do anything." "Then what's going on?" Felix looked away, because looking directly at Hyunjin suddenly felt dangerous. How could he explain this? How could he tell him that every smile, every touch, every moment mattered too much? How could he confess feelings that had grown quietly over years? He couldn't, not yet, maybe not ever, so he settled for the safest truth available. "I'm just tired." Hyunjin studied him carefully. The silence stretched, then he sighed. "If something's bothering you, you can tell me." Sincerity in his voice nearly broke Felix. Because Hyunjin meant it, he always meant it, and that made lying feel even worse. "I know." For a moment neither of them moved. The city lights flickered around them. The evening breeze carried the distant scent of rain. Then Hyunjin smiled softly. The same smile Felix had fallen in love with, the same smile that made everything harder. "Good." They resumed walking. Neither spoke again. Yet something lingered between them. An invisible tension. A question neither was ready to answer. When they reached the intersection where their paths separated, Hyunjin paused. "See you tomorrow." Felix nodded. "Tomorrow." Hyunjin waved before disappearing into the crowd. Felix remained where he was, watching until he could no longer see him. Only then did he continue home. The night felt unusually quiet. His apartment felt emptier than usual. And despite spending an entire evening beside Hyunjin, he somehow missed him already. Hours later, long after darkness settled over the city, Felix sat near his window. His phone illuminated the room. A notification appeared, social media. Normally he would ignore it. Tonight he didn't. The photo loaded slowly, then his breath caught. It was a picture of Hyunjin standing beside Jiho, both smiling. The caption was simple, just two people enjoying an evening together. Nothing unusual, nothing romantic, nothing definitive. Yet Felix stared at the image for a long time. Because for the first time he realized something terrifying. Jiho wasn't leaving. He wasn't a passing acquaintance. He wasn't temporary. He was becoming part of Hyunjin's life. And whether Felix liked it or not, he would have to decide what mattered more, protecting the secret inside his heart.
Days blurred together in a cycle of practice, schedules, and sleepless nights. Outwardly nothing had changed. Inside everything had. Felix had become painfully aware of every detail involving Hyunjin, every smile, every laugh, every notification that lit up his screen. And somehow Jiho always seemed to be connected to it. One afternoon, after an especially exhausting rehearsal, Felix collapsed onto the practice room floor. Sweat clung to his skin and his muscles screamed in protest. The others were equally tired. Some stretched, some scrolled through their phones, some simply lay motionless. Hyunjin sat near the mirror sipping water. His phone vibrated. A smile instantly appeared. Felix looked away before Hyunjin could notice. He didn't need to ask who it was anymore. The answer was becoming predictable. That realization hurt more than it should have. A few minutes later, Hyunjin stood. "I'm heading out." Someone looked up. Hyunjin grabbed his jacket. "I promised I'd meet someone." Felix's chest tightened, even before the name was spoken. Jiho. Hyunjin nodded. A faint smile touched his lips. Just for dinner. Just for dinner. Such harmless words, yet Felix felt as though someone had wrapped invisible fingers around his heart. He forced himself to remain calm, to act normal, to smile, to be the friend he had always been. "Have fun." The words tasted bitter. Hyunjin smiled warmly. "Thanks." Then he left. The door closed behind him, and suddenly the room felt emptier. Felix stared at the floor. He hated this version of himself, the jealous version, the insecure version, the version that measured every moment Hyunjin spent with someone else. This wasn't who he wanted to be. But emotions rarely asked permission before taking root. That evening, Felix found himself wandering through the city alone. The streets glowed beneath thousands of lights, restaurants buzzed with conversation, music drifted from open doorways, the world felt alive. Yet Felix felt strangely disconnected from it. Eventually he stopped in front of a small bookstore. Without thinking he stepped inside. The scent of paper and coffee wrapped around him immediately. It was quiet, peaceful, a temporary escape. Felix wandered between shelves, running his fingers along book spines. For the first time all day his mind began to settle. Until he heard a familiar laugh, his heart stopped. Slowly he turned. Near the back of the store sat Hyunjin and Jiho. The sight hit harder than expected, not because they were doing anything unusual. They were simply talking, sharing coffee, looking through books, yet the intimacy of the moment felt undeniable. Neither noticed Felix. For several seconds he simply stood there, watching. Jiho said something that made Hyunjin laugh, the genuine laugh, the one Felix knew by heart. Then Jiho reached over and brushed a loose strand of hair away from Hyunjin's face. The gesture lasted barely a second, but it felt like a knife. Felix looked away immediately. His pulse thundered in his ears. He should leave, he knew that, yet his feet refused to move. Familiar fear settled inside him, not fear of Jiho, not even fear of rejection, fear of being too late. Because for years Felix had remained silent, years, while someone else had arrived and accomplished in weeks what Felix never dared attempt, being close to Hyunjin. The realization followed him all the way home, and for the first time he couldn't ignore the question haunting him. What if Hyunjin fell in love with someone else? The possibility felt devastating. Because Felix had always imagined there would be time to understand his feelings, time to gather courage, time to figure things out. Now he wasn't so sure. The next morning rain returned. Heavy clouds blanketed the city. Water streaked across windows as practice continued. Everyone seemed quieter than usual, maybe because of the weather, maybe because exhaustion was finally catching up with them. Felix barely noticed. His thoughts remained trapped elsewhere. By lunchtime he had spoken fewer than 20 words. Hyunjin eventually noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed when the others left the room. Hyunjin approached. Okay, Felix looked up. Hyunjin crossed his arms. We're talking. A nervous laugh escaped Felix. About what? About whatever is bothering you. Felix immediately looked away. I told you I'm fine. Hyunjin's voice was gentle but firm. Not. Silence filled the room. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The air felt heavier somehow. Hyunjin sat beside him, close enough for Felix to feel the warmth of his presence, close enough to make breathing difficult. You haven't been yourself for weeks. Felix stared at the floor. Every instinct told him to keep hiding, to stay quiet, to protect their friendship. But another part of him was tired of pretending, tired of watching from a distance, tired of carrying feelings that grew heavier every day. Felix. His name sounded different when Hyunjin said it, softer, more personal. What happened? Felix closed his eyes for a moment. Neither spoke. The room felt impossibly silent. Then he finally whispered, what if someone important to you disappeared? The question surprised even him. Hyunjin blinked. What? Felix swallowed. What if one day they weren't there anymore? A strange sadness crossed Hyunjin's face. They wouldn't stop being important. Felix looked at him. Hyunjin held his gaze. No jokes, no teasing. Only honesty. If someone matters to me, they matter. The words settled deep inside Felix's chest, dangerously deep, because a small part of him wanted to ask the real question, would I still matter if you fell in love with someone else? But fear stopped him, as it always did, so he remained silent. And after a while the conversation drifted elsewhere, yet something had changed. For the first time Felix sensed that Hyunjin was beginning to notice the distance between them, beginning to question it. Beginning to look closer. Neither of them realized how important that would become. Because sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't revealed through confessions. Sometimes they're revealed through the small things, the lingering glances, the unfinished sentences, the moments of silence that say far more than words ever could. The days that followed felt strangely fragile. Something had shifted between them after that conversation. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for Felix to feel it. Enough for Hyunjin to feel it too. The distance that had grown over the past few weeks was still there, yet now it carried a different weight. Like both of them were standing on opposite sides of a door neither knew how to open. One evening the rain returned again. It seemed to follow them everywhere lately. Gray clouds hung low over the city as practice finally ended. Most of the others left quickly. Only Felix and Hyunjin remained. The music had stopped. The mirrors reflected the empty room. The silence felt almost peaceful. Hyunjin sat on the floor, stretching tired muscles. Felix gathered his belongings near the lockers for a while. Neither spoke. Then Hyunjin suddenly laughed, a soft laugh. The unexpected sound drew Felix's attention. What? Hyunjin shook his head. I was just thinking. About what? A smile touched Hyunjin's lips. Remember when we got lost during that trip years ago? Felix blinked. The memory returned immediately. The wrong bus, the unfamiliar streets, hours spent wandering together, eventually finding their way back long after sunset. Felix couldn't help smiling. You were the one reading the map upside down. Hyunjin pointed at him. And you followed me. You sounded confident. I was confident. You were completely wrong. Laughter filled the empty room. For the first time in weeks everything felt normal, comfortable, familiar the way it used to, and maybe that was why Felix's heart hurt, because moments like this reminded him what he stood to lose. Hyunjin eventually leaned back against the wall, his expression softened. We don't do this enough anymore. Felix's smile faded slightly. What? Talk. The single word landed heavily. Hyunjin looked away briefly. We've both been busy. A reasonable explanation, yet neither of them seemed convinced, because the truth was more complicated. The silence wasn't caused by schedule, it was caused by fear. Fear Felix carried every day, fear of speaking too much, fear of revealing too much, fear that one wrong sentence could destroy everything. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass. Hyunjin stared at them for a moment. He spoke quietly. I ask you something? Felix nodded. Sure. Hyunjin hesitated, an unusual thing for him. Normally he said whatever was on his mind. Tonight felt different. Do you dislike Jiho? The question struck directly at the center of Felix's chest. His pulse immediately quickened. For a second he forgot how to breathe. What? Hyunjin turned toward him. Be honest. Felix looked away. The room suddenly felt warmer, smaller, dangerously small. I don't dislike him. That part was true. Hyunjin studied him carefully. Then why do you always look upset when he's around? Felix froze. The question exposed more than he expected. Had it really been that obvious? Apparently it had. Hyunjin waited patiently, not angry, not accusing, simply waiting. Felix struggled for an answer, any answer, something safe, something believable. But every explanation felt weak, every excuse sounded false. Finally he sighed. It's complicated. Hyunjin smiled faintly. When you say that, it usually means you're avoiding the real answer. Felix laughed despite himself. Unfortunately, Hyunjin wasn't wrong. The rain intensified outside. The sound filled the silence between them. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Hyunjin surprised him. Jiho asked me something. Felix felt his stomach tight. What? Hyunjin's gaze dropped to the floor. He asked if there was someone important in my life. Room suddenly felt frozen. Every sound seemed distant. Felix stared at him. Unable to speak, unable to think, unable to stop imagining where this conversation might lead. The word barely emerged above a whisper. Hyunjin smiled softly, a strange smile, thoughtful, almost uncertain. I told him yes. Felix's heart sank. Of course there was someone, maybe Jiho himself, maybe another person Felix didn't know about, maybe. Because there is. Hyunjin's voice interrupted his thoughts. A quiet certainty existed in those words, the kind that made them impossible to ignore. Felix looked down. His chest felt unbearably heavy. He wanted to ask more, needed to ask more, yet fear held him in place. The fear of hearing an answer he wasn't ready for. Eventually they left the studio together. The rain had softened into a gentle drizzle. Streetlights painted golden reflections across the wet pavement. Neither seemed eager to say goodbye, so they walked slowly, talking about random things, old memories, future plans, movies they wanted to watch, small conversations that somehow felt important. One point Hyunjin laughed so hard he nearly stumbled. Instinctively Felix reached out. His hand caught Hyunjin's wrist. For a brief second neither moved. Their eyes met. The world seemed to pause. The city noise faded. The rain disappeared. Everything narrowed to a single moment. A single look. Something unspoken passed between them. Something fragile. Something impossible to name. Then Hyunjin smiled. A small smile different from the others. Softer, warmer. And Felix immediately released his wrist. The spell broke. Reality returned. Cars passed. People walked by. Life continued. Yet neither of them spoke for several seconds because both had felt it. Whatever it was, when they finally reached the intersection where they usually parted ways, Hyunjin stopped. So, Felix looked at him. So, Hyunjin hesitated, then laughed nervously. Another unusual thing. I don't know. Felix couldn't help smiling. That's helpful. I know. They stood there beneath the glow of a street lamp while rain drifted gently through the night air. For some reason, neither wanted to leave first. Neither wanted to end the conversation. Eventually, Hyunjin shook his head. We should probably go home. Probably. Neither moved. The realization made both of them laugh, and somehow that laughter felt different too. When they finally separated, Felix walked away carrying a feeling he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope, small, fragile, dangerous, but real. For the first time since Jiho appeared, Felix wasn't thinking about losing Hyunjin. He was thinking about the way Hyunjin had looked at him, the way his voice had softened, the way neither of them seemed willing to say goodbye. And for the first time, he allowed himself to wonder if perhaps he wasn't the only one carrying emotions he didn't fully understand. Meanwhile, several streets away, Hyunjin stood beneath the rain and watched Felix disappear into the distance, long after he could no longer see him, long after the city lights swallowed his silhouette. Because there was a question growing inside Hyunjin's heart too, a question he had been avoiding for far too long, and lately every answer seemed to lead back to the same person.
For the next few days, neither Felix nor Hyunjin mentioned what had happened beneath the street lamp. They didn't talk about the lingering eye contact. They didn't talk about the silence that had felt strangely intimate. They didn't talk about the questions growing inside both of them. Instead, they continued as usual, or at least they tried to, but some things become impossible to ignore once you notice them. Felix began catching Hyunjin watching him, not often, not enough to seem obvious. Yet often enough to make his pulse stumble, a glance across the practice room, a smile that appeared for no reason, a moment of hesitation before looking away, small things, dangerous things. Meanwhile, Hyunjin found himself noticing Felix in ways he never had before, the way Felix always remembered everyone's favorite drinks, the way he quietly helped others without expecting recognition, the way his laughter seemed capable of brightening even the worst days, things Hyunjin had always appreciated. But lately, appreciation was beginning to feel like something else, something deeper, something harder to explain. One Friday evening, after a particularly long rehearsal, everyone decided to gather for dinner. The restaurant was crowded, warm lights glowed overhead. The The scent of grilled food filled the air. For a while everything felt relaxed, comfortable, until Jiho arrived. The atmosphere shifted almost immediately, not because anyone disliked him, quite the opposite. Jiho was easy to talk to, friendly, funny. The kind of person who fit naturally into any group. Everyone welcomed him. Everyone except Felix, not openly, not intentionally, but something inside him tightened the moment Jiho sat beside Hyunjin. Hyunjin seemed happy to see him. That familiar smile appeared again. The one Felix had spent weeks trying to ignore. Conversation flowed around the table. Laughter erupted repeatedly. Yet Felix found himself growing quieter, more distant. At some point, Jiho excused himself to answer a phone call. The moment he disappeared, someone jokingly nudged Hyunjin. "You two seem close." Table immediately erupted with teasing. Hyunjin nearly choked on his drink. What? The laughter only intensified. Felix forced himself to remain expressionless, even though his heartbeat had become painfully loud. One member grinned. "Come on, you spend a lot of time together." Another nodded. "And you're always smiling whenever he texts." Hyunjin rolled his eyes. "That's not what you think." "Then what is it?" For the first time, uncertainty crossed Hyunjin's face. A rare sight. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, as if he genuinely didn't know the answer. Felix looked away, because suddenly he wasn't sure he wanted to hear it. A few moments later, Jiho returned. The conversation moved on, but the question remained, floating invisibly between them. Later that night, after dinner ended, Hyunjin offered to walk Felix home. Neither questioned it simply felt natural. The city was quiet. A cool breeze moved through the streets. Neon reflections shimmered across rain-soaked pavement. For several minutes they walked in silence, then Hyunjin spoke. "They think I'm interested in Jiho." Felix's stomach immediately tightened. He kept his expression neutral. "Are you?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Hyunjin looked surprised, not by the question itself, but by how quickly Felix had asked it. The answer didn't come immediately. That worried Felix even more. Finally, Hyunjin sighed. "I don't know." Response caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" Hyunjin shoved his hands into his pockets. His gaze remained fixed ahead. "Jiho is great." Felix's chest sank. "Of course he was." Hyunjin continued. "He's kind." Another blow. "Funny." Another. "He cares about people." Felix looked away. The list sounded painfully familiar, because those were the same qualities Hyunjin valued most. The same qualities that could easily make someone fall in love. Then Hyunjin surprised him. "But when I'm with him..." He hesitated. As good as things are, something always feels missing. Felix's heartbeat faltered. The city noise seemed distant. What kind of missing? For a moment, Hyunjin didn't answer. His expression became thoughtful, almost vulnerable. Then he laughed softly. "Sound ridiculous." "No." Felix's voice came out quieter than intended. "Don't." Hyunjin looked at him. Their eyes met. A strange emotion flickered across Hyunjin's face. Something warm, something uncertain, something neither of them knew how to describe. "When I'm with certain people," Hyunjin said carefully, "I feel like I can completely be myself." Felix couldn't breathe. "Certain people." A small smile appeared on Hyunjin's lips, the kind of smile that revealed more than words. "Yeah." Neither looked away. The moment stretched, longer, until finally Hyunjin glanced toward the sky. As if breaking eye contact had become necessary, the tension dissolved, yet the feeling remained. When they reached Felix's apartment building, both slowed instinctively. Neither seemed eager for the evening to end. Hyunjin stopped near the entrance. Felix turned toward him. For a second, neither spoke. The city lights reflected in Hyunjin's eyes. The night air felt unusually still. Then Hyunjin smiled. A genuine smile, soft and warm, the kind Felix had always treasured. "Get some sleep." Felix laughed quietly. "You always say that, because you never listen." "Listen sometimes." Rarely. Their laughter blended together, easy, natural, comfortable, yet beneath it lingered something neither could ignore anymore, something changing, something growing. As Hyunjin turned to leave, Felix suddenly realized he wasn't thinking about Jiho, not for the first time, not even the second. Somewhere along the way, the fear had begun to fade. Because lately, whenever Hyunjin smiled, his attention always seemed to return to the same place. The same conversations, the same moments, the same person. And for the first time, Felix found himself wondering if perhaps the distance he feared wasn't growing at all. Perhaps, without either of them realizing it, they had been moving closer the entire time. The possibility settled warmly inside his chest as he watched Hyunjin disappear down the street. And for the first time in weeks, he smiled all the way home.